Hello. Welcome back. Mind your damn business. That's an aggressive statement to say. That's really aggressive when the person who says mind your damn business is an ex-con just out of prison, and the person on the receiving end of that aggressive statement is a cop. A cop who is suspicious of you. Narrator, give the audience more info.
After 5 long years in prison, Mike Rogers returns to a world that views him with suspicion and mistrust. Determined to build a new life and leave his troubled past behind, he secures a job at an auto shop thanks to a former cellmate. Despite his best efforts to stay on the straight and narrow, Mike finds himself under constant scrutiny from the police, particularly Captain Peters, who seems intent on catching him in a misstep. As Mike struggles to prove his worth and resist the shadows of his past, he realizes that his journey to redemption will be harder than he ever imagined.
And now, without further ado,
Mike slid his key into the front door lock, the clicks echoing down the empty hallway. He paused for a moment, looking down at the scratched gray welcome mat beneath his feet. Home. After 5 long years in prison, he was still getting reacquainted with the concept. Stepping inside the modest one-bedroom apartment, Mike flipped on the lights and set his toolbox down on the kitchen counter. He had just finished his shift at Tony's auto shop, grateful that his former cellmate had helped get him the job when he got out. It wasn't much, but it kept him busy and out of trouble. Mike rubbed his shoulder, trying to ease the ache that had lingered since his morning workout. He had taken to exercising vigorously each day, using the discipline to focus his mind and keep his anxiety at bay. The routine gave his long days structure. He heated up a bowl of soup and settled onto the second-hand couch, flipping on the evening news. As he ate, Mike found himself staring absently at the TV, not absorbing anything. His mind kept returning to earlier that day. The bell on the shop door had rung and Mike glanced up from the Buick he was under to see 2 police officers entering, their gaze fixed on him. His chest tightened as he looked back to the engine, hoping they were just here for an oil change. No such luck.
Michael Rogers?
The older cop had barked. Mike slowly sat up, already knowing what came next. The interrogation was familiar by now. Demands to know his whereabouts, his contacts, if he was using again. Mike answered calmly, used to the drill after a year. The search of his locker followed, revealing nothing. He knew his rights this time, made them get a warrant before they tossed his apartment. Again. Just like clockwork every few weeks. Mike understood why they watched him. An ex-con, especially one who got wrapped up with gangs like he did, was always suspect. But he had done his time, kept his head down since getting out. All he wanted was a fresh start. Apparently, Captain Peters didn't see it that way. Mike knew the cop had it out for him. He seemed to think Mike would slip up eventually, and Peters would be there when he did. But Mike was determined not to let anyone drag him back to his past. He would walk the straight and narrow from here on out. Prove he could turn his life around. Even if the police didn't make it easy. Mike's apartment was a small, nondescript space, furnished with second-hand items that had seen better days. The couch sagged in the middle, the coffee table bore the scars of countless spills and scratches, and the kitchen table wobbled slightly. But it was his, and for that, he was grateful. The walls, still bare, echoed with the silence that enveloped him each night. He had thought about putting up some pictures or paintings, something to make the place feel more like home, but he never seemed to get around to it. He washed his empty soup bowl and headed to bed, hoping tomorrow would be calmer. He had gotten through worse, he could handle Captain Peters' badgering. As he drifted off to sleep, though, a voice in the back of his mind whispered, "How long until you break?" Mike's days were a constant struggle to stay on the right path. Every morning he woke up early, before the sun even had a chance to rise, and went for a run around the neighborhood. The streets were still and quiet, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of his sneakers on the pavement and the distant hum of early commuters. Running gave him a sense of freedom he had missed during his time in prison, a chance to clear his mind and prepare for the day ahead. After his run, he would shower, eat a quick breakfast, and head to Tony's auto shop. Tony, his former cellmate, had been a lifeline. When Mike had first gotten out, he had no idea where to start. Jobs were hard to come by for someone with a record, but Tony had vouched for him, and that had made all the difference. Working on cars was something Mike was good at, something he took pride in. It was honest work, and it kept his mind and hands busy. But despite his efforts, there was always a cloud of suspicion hanging over him. The police visits were a constant reminder of that. Every time he saw a patrol car pass by the shop or parked near his apartment, his heart would race. He knew they were watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. Captain Peters, in particular, seemed to relish the idea of catching him in some wrongdoing. Mike couldn't understand why Peters was so fixated on him. He had served his time, paid his debt to society. Yet, it seemed like no matter what he did, he would always be viewed through the lens of his past mistakes. The frustration of it all was overwhelming at times. There were nights when he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he would ever truly be free. Despite the constant pressure, Mike refused to give in. He had made a promise to himself while he was in prison, a promise that he would turn his life around. He had seen too many of his fellow inmates get out, only to fall back into old habits and end up right back behind bars. He was determined not to be one of them. Every day was a battle, but it was a battle he was willing to fight. He kept a small notebook by his bed where he would jot down his thoughts and goals. It helped to put things in perspective, to remind himself of why he was doing this. On particularly tough days, he would read over the entries, finding strength in his own words. It was a simple act, but it grounded him, gave him a sense of purpose. Mike also made an effort to reconnect with his family. It had been tough at first. They had been hurt and disappointed by his actions, and trust was something that had to be rebuilt slowly. But he was committed to mending those relationships. He would call his mother every Sunday, visit his sister and her kids whenever he could. Their support meant everything to him, even if it was given cautiously at times. Yet, for all his efforts, there was still a part of him that struggled with the weight of his past. The memories of his time in prison, the things he had seen and experienced, were not easily forgotten. They lingered in the back of his mind, shadows that he couldn't quite escape. He had learned to live with them, but they were a constant reminder of a life he was determined to leave behind. As Mike lay in bed that night, his mind wandered back to the conversation he had had with Tony earlier that day. Tony had noticed the tension in him, the way he had been quieter than usual. Over lunch, he had pulled Mike aside.
"Listen, man,"
Tony had said, his voice low and serious.
"you're doing good. I can see how hard you're trying, but you can't let them get to you. Don't give Peters or anyone else the power to mess with your head. You've got this."
Tony's words had meant a lot. It was good to know that someone believed in him, saw the effort he was making. It gave him a renewed sense of determination. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to prove himself. Mike knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But he was ready. He had come too far to give up now. As he closed his eyes and let sleep take over, he reminded himself of the promise he had made. He would not let his past define him. He would build a new life, one step at a time. And no matter how long it took, he would find a way to truly be free.
This was only chapter/episode 1. In chapter/episode 2, the police, and in particular Captain Peters, intensifies their presence on Mike. And Mike's mouth gets him in trouble. I'll be back in a week or two with chapter/episode 2. Until then, check out these other stories myself and the algorithm thinks you'll like. Well, that's it for me now. See you in the future.